everyone, and welcome to Political Forum. My name is Mike Jacobson. Joining us tonight is Alderman Maria Hadden with the 49th Ward. Now, Political Forum is your chance to speak with local elected officials who represent the city of Chicago. It's your chance to voice your opinion. If you have questions, comments, or concerns, this is the story. This is the place for that. So the number's at the bottom of the screen, 312-738-1060. That's 312-738-1060. Question, comment, or concern, call us. And by the way, we're also live online at cantv.org/hotline, so check us out there too as well. All right, folks, so let's get this party started. What do you say? Let's talk. Alderwoman, for those, because you're a freshman Alderman, so first of all, congratulations on being on your inaugural, your very first time on Political Forum. We hope to have you back. So for folks who may not know much about you, I want you to talk about yourself for a little bit.
Sure. So I have been in the 49th Ward as a resident for since 2007. But it was actually the first neighborhood. Rogers Park was the first neighborhood I lived in when I moved to Chicago in 2004. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio. Most of my professional background is in the nonprofit sector in civic education and engagement. So I really got involved in my neighborhood with the participatory budgeting process that Alderman Moore started in 2009. From there was a co-founding board member of a national nonprofit, and spent the previous decade actually traveling around the country, helping other electeds in cities and community organizations set up these community-based decision-making processes.
So you're a fellow Buckeye.
I am a fellow Buckeye.
Yeah, I'm from Cleveland originally, so how about that? So go Buckeyes. All right. So that's great. So now let's show some information for folks how they can get a hold of you. So there is your office address and also email, the website, and also the phone number. And looking at the 49th Ward, you can kind of explain the ward for people.
Sure, absolutely. So we're the far northeast corner of Chicago. I find myself now when I'm downtown and working with all these different aldermen from around the city, people thinking of the north side, and they think of it as like stopping around like some of them even think it stops around Uptown or like Lawrence Avenue.
Right.
And so I tell people further north.
Right.
We're almost to Evanston, right? So we've got the lake. We are predominantly the East Rogers Park neighborhood, a bit of West Rogers Park and Westridge.
And so you also have ward nights and town halls. Is that true? So how can
Absolutely.
people get a hold of you, find out about that?
So typically on Wednesdays, instead of here with you guys, I'm usually at the office from 5 to 7 for ward nights, so no appointment needed. My office is open until 7 p.m. every Wednesday, so 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. But yeah, first come, first serve. I get to do the... we see everybody that's on the list. And then every month we also have a monthly town hall. So if you go to the website, 49thward.org, you can sign up for the newsletter. So we do a weekly email newsletter. If you are not on the newsletter list, you can sign up right there. We also share a lot of information about our community events other than mine, businesses that are opening, other relevant news. We'll have weather alerts and street sweeping schedules, and we also try to do some job postings.
Awesome. So that again is at 49thward.org. Okay, now let's get into the issues at hand. So first and foremost, some tragic news that just happened recently in your ward on the Howard line on the CTA stop. There was a death. Can you just tell folks about that?
Sure. So yesterday we lost a young man, 20 years old, Mr. Webb. He was killed. It was a gun homicide. There was a interpersonal conflict or altercation between him and some other folks, from what we know right now. It was in the middle of the day. It's very sad, especially, he had moved to the area to kind of escape violence in a neighborhood he had lived in previously. So always very sad to lose a life, especially one so young. Police were able to capture some good video footage of suspects. I believe they have 2 people in custody. Charges are pending. So we're happy that they were able to take some swift action there. And also, gun violence is an issue that Chicagoans are dealing with every day, and it's something we have to work on.
Yeah, so moving forward, like helping to move the community forward and the ward forward, what actions, are ongoing, or what do you see are the actions moving forward to help the community, heal?
Sure.
so to speak?
One of the, and this is around the city, right, but especially in certain neighborhoods, focusing on kind of our community health and safety was something, a big focal point of neighbors through the campaign, and certainly something that we were leading with in taking office. So we have a community safety kind of committee that'll begin meeting probably late January. So with folks who are interested in working on not just our gun violence prevention aspects, but what does that community wellness look like? How are we connecting people to school programs? How are we doing intervention, right, before folks kind of get involved in violence? And how are we knitting together a lot of our community organizations? So that's been the direction that I'm taking. So we have wonderful community organizations, both in our neighborhood and operating around, and several neighbors and community, kind of neighbor community groups who are interested in changing the way that this is happening. People are tired of the violence, and we know that we need to support a lot of the kind of social economic causes and focus on our violence prevention.
So that's excellent. But we're going to step now out of the ward and look more at the city, look at some city issues. And one of the things I want to ask your opinion on is what's going on with the city's police department from the top down. Looking at, the first thing like Johnson, Commander Johnson, today now he has officially resigned. Apparently
Retired.
Retired. Excuse me, retired. So, but there's just some really interesting and head-shaking things that are going on, with the city's police department. I want to get your take on it.
Sure. So I am, one of the reasons I ran for office was to bring change, looking at transparency and accountability in our city. Outside of the civic engagement with participatory budgeting, a lot of my community activism work was focused around police accountability. So I was a member of the Black Youth Project 100, and worked with lots of groups around the city to bring justice to victims of police violence and misconduct. I am cautiously optimistic with the direction that the mayor's taking on really bringing more accountability and transparency. We absolutely have to have it. And I know when we were talking a little earlier, one of the big conflicts that this creates, right, whether it's our police department or our city council or our state government, when you have people who are either there's corruption or there's unethical behavior or there are abuses of power, it undermines the work of everyone else. And so, yesterday we had someone killed in our community, and we relied on our 24th District police officers to do police work to find the perpetrators of, the crime. That's what we need police to do. And we need to work on the accountability, the transparency, and the culture change in the police department, so that Chicago Police Department can really serve our residents. I imagine it's difficult for a lot of the beat officers in our district dealing with some of the politics and the top-down issues as well. When we see the kind of unethical behavior at the top, to still be able to do their jobs every day. So whether it's the police department or city council, those are huge culture changes that we need to see. We have to have leaders in leadership that sets the tone and shows the example.
Yeah, exactly. We were talking about this before. When you're looking at leadership and leaders in the city, and also police department, and I think it includes every single police officer. They are a leader in the community and a leader for the city. And unfortunately, maybe this is kind of unfair to these wonderful men and women, is that they're looked on as sort of like superheroes, that they're going to always do the right thing no matter what is thrown at them, spit at them, and things like that.
Right. And that's where in public office, whether you're in a uniform or whether you're an elected official, whether you're a city employee, we have a higher standard and a code of conduct and ethics that we have to hold ourselves to, and that's difficult. But just because it's difficult doesn't mean that we shouldn't be held accountable to those standards.
Right. And so speaking of those, looking at ethical standards, so you're on the ethics committee.
Correct.
And so you're just we were talking before that you guys are working on some legislation and looking at lobbying. So talk about this. This has been in the news, in the past couple of days, lobbying with city officials and people involved with the city.
Right, so Alderman Michelle Smith and Matt O'Shea introduced legislation in council last month that we heard in our ethics committee today. That passed unanimously through committee, actually. That would strengthen our ethics guidelines for city officials, so employees and elected officials, to make it prohibited for us to lobby, right, to lobby other local governments, and also strengthening the disclosure guidelines on relatives living in our household who are engaged in lobbying activities with the city of Chicago.
That when this came up, that kind of surprised me because it figures like that's
Sounds like it's something we should have been doing already.
exactly right.
Yeah, absolutely. I find that there are a lot of things in our ethical, like our ethics codes in Chicago, that have been lax. So this is the second ethics reform package that's come through in the last 6 months, specifically focused on having better standards. If this passes in City Council on the 18th, this is really bringing us just kind of up to par with other cities and major forms of government. Because when we see things in the news of elected officials clearly doing unethical things,
Right.
When you have that gut check where it's like, how can they work and make money doing that, right, for that firm, and also still be in this body making decisions that they're directly benefiting from. And when we see those types of things, but find that they're not illegal and they weren't even against our ethics codes, that means we have something wrong with our ethics codes. So I'm very heartened to see, and the unanimous support of the committee, I think, also shows that the city of Chicago is ready to move on. And to set that example for ethical behavior moving forward.
Wonderful. So it looks like we have our first caller of the night. Caller, are you there? Do you have a question or comment?
Hello.
Yes, hello.
Hi, thank you very much for taking my call. I wanted to ask the Alderwoman about a story that I saw recently in the news about a gentleman who catcalled a young woman. She ignored his calls, and he killed her in the UIC parking lot. And that story bothered me, not just because of how horrific it would be to do that to somebody, but I read that gentleman had gone to prison for robbery, but he'd been out of prison less than 6 months and had committed a sexual assault and a murder. And my concern, having read many of these stories, is that we incarcerate a lot of young men, and we don't really work on rehabilitating them. Then we come back to Chicago. They don't really have a safety net or support system kind of help them readjust or acclimate to regular society, and these sort of horrible headlines are kind of what we get. So with that in mind, I wanted to ask the Alderwoman if she thinks that Chicago needs to have some sort of safety net in place to help returning citizens readjust and sort of develop some support and get reacclimated, and if so, what sorts of things does she foresee as being feasible for a city like ours?
Sure. Thank you for the question. I absolutely agree with you. We need to support our returning citizens. We've got some great community organizations like the Safer Foundation that the city and different neighborhoods and organizations do work with and support. To the best of my knowledge, we don't have specific city programs for it. One of the things that you touched on, though, that I think is very important but falls outside of the scope of what we do in the city, it certainly doesn't fall outside of what we can advocate for in our county and in our state, and that is real reform for our prison and incarceration system, right? Because that's like who's going to jail, who we're incarcerating, how long we're keeping people locked up, and also what kind of programs and how we treat people while they are incarcerated is a huge issue. It's not working. It's in many cases not humane, and it's not working to serve our communities overall, right? So it's not serving the folks who are incarcerated. It's not helping them to prepare when they are returning to our communities. And in many cases, it's an inhumane system for a lot of the folks, not just incarcerated, but also for a lot of the staff and the people involved. that's a strong area that I would continue to advocate for, as well as on our local level, within the city and, of course, within our community. I'm very interested in working with organizations who do support returning citizens, and making sure that we can do more to put them in touch with resources, so that they can reintegrate into our communities.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, that was chilling news when that came out.
It's terrible.
Awful, absolutely awful. Okay, so now I'm going to kind of now switch over and go back to really looking at folks back to your ward,
Sure.
and but it's kind of got a little city flavor in it too, and it's about the cannabis
Yeah.
legislation that's going to start now come Jan 1.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about that. What you're working on in advance, and what you foresee moving forward.
Sure. So a couple pieces to that. So one, we do have an upcoming community meeting in the 49th Ward with a group that's been hosting Chronic Conversations. So we're co-hosting with a Just Harvest in our community. So December 10th, it's a Tuesday, 7 p.m. at Willie B. White Park. That's 1610 West Howard Street. So there we'll be talking about how this is going to impact our community, opportunities for engagement and people getting involved in the industry, and just kind of this general thing of what's happening to us on January 1 and what are the implications. I also serve on the zoning committee, and so some of the legislation that's been going through at the city level to prepare for recreational cannabis being legal in the state of Illinois on January 1st was zoning changes, right? Figuring out where in the city different businesses could locate. So both for growing, for selling through the dispensaries as well. We've also just passed an updated city enforcement ordinances, so further decriminalizing and just kind of making them fines, and also really changing a lot of what was in our city code since it will be legal. And in process, we're working on what our on-site consumption laws will be. So that's still in process. A lot of the work, though, through our Black Caucus, the Chicago Aldermanic Black Caucus, has really been trying to focus on how we get racial equity and participation when it comes to the industry. And it's the state of Illinois and our legislators there have passed social equity legislation that is groundbreaking in the country. It's the furthest any state has gone. And we also still have to figure out how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that it's going to be an interesting year.
Yeah.
But we do have the real opportunity in the city of Chicago to take what the state has given us and to build upon that so that communities have a say and that we're really involving folks that have been disproportionately impacted in this industry.
Right, to lead. That'd be great. Fantastic. So staying in the realm of community, city, and also in your ward, also the census is also next year.
Absolutely.
So and you told me before that you worked on the census last time in 2010.
Yeah, I was a census enumerator in 2010.
Yeah.
So it was a great way. I would highly encourage people if you're looking for the work or if you're interested, apply to work for the census in 2020. I know they've been posting their hiring ads. We shared in our newsletter. It was a fantastic experience. But I think everyone can agree in the city of Chicago, Alderman Roboyras heads kind of a joint commission on the census. So we have our census committee to make sure that we can get everyone counted in Chicago. It is very important for cities like ours to not have anyone left out. And there are challenges.
That's what I was going to ask you. What are the challenges?
Yeah, the federal government's not necessarily funding the census at previous levels, and there's a lot of changes in organization where there is a real possibility that we could have people not counted. The city's already started an education campaign, and we'll be working at local levels within our ward as well, partnering with community organizations to make sure that people know how to fill out their census forms, what they need to fill out, and really doing a drive to push. But a lot of it will likely come down to the door knocking and the ground game come summer, after the waves of the mail-in census forms are kind of done. We're going to need local people to go and to do the work and work for the census to do the enumerating, because that's how we count everybody.
Yeah, because there's challenges even with that too, because I think of the national rhetoric that's been going around, about the census and about people actually afraid to possibly fill out because they don't know if they're going to be there's going to be things that are going to happen to them if they fill out. So can you just talk about, number one, the importance of why it's needed, why everyone needs to fill out the census. Everyone needs to fill out the census. And two, the challenges of going door to door, because that's that community trust angle.
Yeah, absolutely. One, we need to be reflected in who lives in the country, and that's why it's important for everyone to fill out the census forms, right? Not just citizens, not just homeowners, not just families with children. If we want an accurate representation of who represents our country, and this gets into the political, right, in that sense, right, whose story gets told and what's reflected, that's one of the primary reasons the census is important. And when it comes over to the practical financial side, it also determines how we get a lot of federal funds and how our federal budget is kind of directed. So who's there, what the need is, who are in our cities, is one of the foundational pieces of arguments we make around a lot of our public funding. So we need everybody to fill out their census forms and return them.
Wonderful. Okay, so now staying in your ward. So one thing that's been going on that I've noticed, because I live just below, I live in the 40th ward, and right along the lake of these two wards is the erosion that's happening. As we're all, like the news is talking about the lake levels. Everyone, if you're in a ward where the north side all the way down to the south side, you know about the lakeshore erosion because there's beaches and that are just going away, like that. So talk about that and the challenges that are up ahead.
Absolutely. And just by the way, as you're like throwing all these things at me, I'm like, oh my God, there's so much.
Welcome to the office,
right? So Lake Michigan is near record levels, and I was listening to some of the latest figures from the Army Corps of Engineers Detroit office. They expect us to kind of set new records come February. So lake levels are going to continue to rise a bit. They've been up for the last year or so, and with the increased precipitation and kind of storm activity, what we've seen along the lakefront is a lot of erosion and infrastructure damage. So certainly we saw a bit of this in Rogers Park along kind of three of our northernmost, very small kind of beach parks, Juneway, Rogers, and Howard. We saw this last summer. And the Park District did some kind of temporary infrastructure fixes with concrete that they thought would stabilize the land. Lake Michigan said no, took it back. But what we've seen specifically we had a storm on Halloween and then another one a couple weeks later. And these weren't even major storms by Chicago standards, but with the high levels of the lake and the wave action, it's just taking the land away. So emergency stabilization work was deemed necessary by our Department of Transportation, the Army Corps of Engineers, and the Parks Department. So the last couple of weeks, we've had major construction and multiple tons of boulders being put into what they call riprap, or these rubble mound revetments, to literally secure the land so that our infrastructure isn't put at risk. And when we're talking about the infrastructure, we are talking about the parks. The beaches are almost gone because of the lake levels, but we're also talking about Sheridan Road and US 41 and people's homes. So we've got, apartment buildings, condo buildings, and actual, Sheridan Road that's right there. So it's not just about losing the beaches. And I feel like when I took office in May, some of the early conversations with some of the press, I kept trying to say, this isn't just about us losing our beaches, right? Because people are like, oh, wow, you lost beach. It's about real infrastructure lost and public land lost. Yeah.
All right, so we're wrapping up here. We've got about a little more than a minute, but I want to get to this point. So I know you're working on a community process for the ward's only city-owned lot on Howard and Ashland.
Yeah, absolutely. So we had one community meeting with a developer who had put a proposal together for that site after a lot of feedback. Considering it's our only city-owned lot, really decided that we'd like a community-centered process to kind of proactively decide what we'd like there, and look forward to working with our Department of Housing and the Planning Department on that. So that'll be coming up in 2020.
Also, a community process for recommendations for the future of two of the ward's elementary schools.
Correct. So Newfield Elementary and Eugene Field Elementary Several parents and community groups have been working on addressing some challenges around enrollment that we're facing, and looking at these schools that had been previously one elementary, were split several years ago, and we've got a community process that we're hosting to really figure out what's the right path forward for these schools.
And finally, plenty more to talk about. I want to fit this last part in. Fargo. I've seen the movie. I don't know. I'm not too familiar with the Netflix series, but apparently
Yes.
the Fargo filming is in the 49th Ward,
Yeah.
and it's sort of affecting, obviously, residents in the ward. So what's going on?
Parking. So actually tomorrow night at Potawatomi Park, 7 p.m. or 6:30 p.m., we actually have a community meeting for folks who live in the area who've been impacted by the filming. They will be revisiting our ward multiple times, I think through April as they're filming season 4. And one of our homes in Rogers Park was chosen as a significant site, which is kind of cool. So the Chicago Film Office and the film crew have been working with neighbors to make sure that they're not taking up so much space. And tomorrow night we'll get to sit down with them and the community to make sure that we can all happily coexist.
There it is. There it is. All right, so I'm going to show your information just one more time. We're going to show it to the website, which is 49thward.org, 49thward.org. There you get to find all this information, including there's an email to reach her, there's a newsletter to reach the Alderwoman, there's the address, there's so many different things.
Social media, we've got Facebook,
That's
Instagram,
right.
Twitter. Yeah.
That's right. All over the place.
All there.
So wonderful. Well, thank you so much for
thank you.
joining us.
Yeah,
It was
absolutely.
awesome. So we hope to have you back in the new year in 2020. And I want to thank all the viewers for watching. I want to thank the caller for calling in. Political Forum is your chance to talk with elected officials in the city of Chicago. Join us every Wednesday at 7 p.m. as we have on great guests. So until next Wednesday, everyone, please have a good night.